All right, welcome everyone to the MPO meeting for the Old Colony region. I'm going to read the accessibility statement and then we'll do the roll call. This accessibility statement in Title VI non-discrimination statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Microphones or telephones will be used by all speakers. If you would like these accommodations, please contact Mary Walden at 508-583-1833 extension 202. And under the notice of non-discrimination rights and protection to beneficiaries, with regard to the federal Title VI non-discrimination protections and the state non-discrimination protections is included on this meeting's agenda, is available on the Old Colony Planning Council website at www.ocpcrpa.org. Again, please contact Mary Walden at 508-583-1833 extension 202 for more information. Thank you. So before we do public comments, we should do the roll call. I assume, Sean, you're going to do the roll, or is it Charlie?
I'll take care of it.
All right, Charlie, you want to go ahead?
Brockton. Plymouth. West Bridgewater.
Yeah, Mary Anderson.
Whitman.
Whitman, here, Dan Salvucci.
MassDOT Boston.
I assume for the secretary that Steve Wolf will represent the secretary and
Yes.
CEO of MassDOT, Jamie Tesler.
MassDOT Highway Division.
Pam Hasner representing Administrator Jonathan Gulliver.
Brockton Area Transit.
Here.
And Old Colony Planning Council.
Mary Waldron representing President of the Old Colony Planning Council, Christine Joy. And if I could, just Lee Hartman is stuck in a meeting with, not stuck in, he's in a meeting with the new with the new town manager for Plymouth. So he's unable to join it, but we'll try to do so. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
Chair. We do have a quorum present.
All right, Charlie. Before we move on, Michael, have you just changed your name to Bat since you didn't actually introduce yourself? You just said here.
Yeah, it's more efficient to just call myself Bat.
That's what I thought. But, all right. Why don't we move on? So, are there any members of the public who would like to address the MPO today? I don't see any, so let's move on to the next agenda item. And that, let's take up the minutes, I believe, minutes of February 15, 2022. Can I get a motion and a second to approve those minutes?
I'll motion Dan Salvucci.
I'll second Mary Anderson.
Are there any changes or comments to the minutes? Seeing none. Charlie, can you read the roll, please?
West Bridgewater Meredith Anderson.
Yes.
Whitman Daniel Salvucci.
Yes.
MassDOT Steve Wolfel.
Yes.
MassDOT Pam Hasner.
Yes.
Brockton Area Transit Michael Lambert.
Yes.
Old Colony Planning Council Mary
Yes.
Waldron.
Yes, I don't know if you heard me. Sorry, Charlie.
Yep. Motion
Thank you.
carries unanimously.
All right. We can move to the next agenda item, which is the update from the Brockton Area Transit Authority. So you want to go ahead, Mike?
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, the workforce is safe and accounted for. Second, some good news in terms of ridership. Last month was our best month of the fiscal year so far, and last week was our best week of the fiscal year so far. So that's, I think we're looking at two different things. One is obviously the loosening of COVID restrictions and shutdowns, and then also I think the rising gas prices are encouraging more people to take transit. That is double good news for us as we are locked into a long-term fuel contract. So we're not feeling the squeeze yet. So we're happy to pass on that savings to the customer. The feds extended the mask mandate for transit 1 month to April, mid-April, and expect to have more guidance fairly soon. So we will continue to enforce and advise on that front. And then finally, we're entering, you'll hear about this later on, but we're entering our capital planning phase of the year along with MassDOT. We've submitted a request to obviously focus on maintaining our state of good repair, but also begin in earnest the transition to electric infrastructure and electric vehicles. So every bus on our current capital plan is electric. And obviously that comes with, a lot of planning that we'll be doing hand in hand with MassDOT and a lot of infrastructure investment as well.
All right, any questions for Mike? All right, seeing none, thanks, Mike. We'll move on to the next agenda, item, which is any 2022 to 2026 tip amendments adjustments. Charlie, I believe this is still just a placeholder. We have nothing today, right?
That is correct. No action items for today.
All right, so we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the development of the federal fiscal year 2023 to 2027 tip, review of scenarios and potential termination for first set of projects. I assume this is you, Charlie, so I'll give you the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the MPO is continuing its progress towards a preferred set of projects and ultimately a draft tip for release for a public review and comment period, before the MPO today, we have two scenarios for the MPO's review and consideration. Next slide. So I'll note that as a result of tip readiness days and a review of the evaluation criteria, these two scenarios are very similar, except for year 2027. So we'll do a quick rundown of the projects, and we'll note that the years 23 through 26 are identical for both scenarios. So in 2023, there are two projects. The first is Stoughton improvements and related work at Central, Canton, and Tosca Drive, currently at 100%. Project number 2 is Stoughton corridor improvements on Route 138, advanced construction phase 1 of 2. Year 2024, there are two projects. The first being Stoughton corridor improvements on Route 138, advanced construction phase 2. And the second project being Brockton Route 123, center at Plymouth Street signalization and geometric improvements. In 2025, there are two projects. The first being Brockton improvement projects at Lyman, Grove, and Summer Street intersection and the replacement of the Grove Street Bridge. And the second project is in Easton on Route 138, signalization and geometric improvements at 138 at Elm Street, continuing northward up to the previous terminus of the 138 at Union Street signalization and geometric improvements project that was completed in recent years. In 2026, there are three projects, the first being Abington intersection improvements at Hancock and Chestnut Street. That's the installation of a roundabout. Second project is Duxbury Kingston signalization of the Route 3 at Route 3A on and off ramps, both northbound and southbound side. And finally, in 2026, there's the Hanson Route 14 Advanced Construction Phase 1 project. Now here's where we start talking about 2027. I note that highlighted in green are the two additional projects being added to the TIP in 2027. The first being Abington intersection improvements at Route 139 at Chestnut Street. And note this is a pre-25% design. And the second project highlighted in green is Stoughton intersection improvements at Canton School and Summer Street. And rounding out 27 is phase 2 of the Hanson Route 14 construction project. So when we were looking at 2027, looking at candidate projects, looked at terms of readiness, evaluation criteria, and the third element that we looked at was what did we have for available regional target funds for programming. And in the where we already had phase 2 of Hanson Route 14, we had about a balance of $7.6 million to work with. So by programming these two additional projects in 2027, we essentially were able to use pretty much the balance of the available target funds in 2027. So this is option 1. I note that the Abington project is on State Highway. It's a HSIP crash slope cluster, and it's also on the National Highway System. The second project being considered in this scenario 1, The Stoughton project, I note that that's on the National Highway System. It's located within an HSIP crash cluster. Any questions on scenario 1 at this point before we go on to scenario 2?
Yeah, Charlie, if I may, in
Yep.
2025, the Brockton intersection, the Grove Street Bridge, is that the bridge, the small bridge that's behind the fire station? I'm
Yes,
not too sure. Grove Street,
It's the one to the south of the intersection.
right, the one that's by the senior housing area?
Yep, that has the Jersey barriers up right now for the lane
Yeah,
reduction.
yeah.
Yep.
All right, because I've spoken to the mayor about that a number of times when we used to have in-house meetings. It's been a project in waiting a long time, and there's a heavy traffic there with people coming in and out of that housing area. So I'm glad that at least it's coming forward now. I think it's an important project that needs to get done.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, just to this project, the city has it under design, and the designer is CDM Smith. Okay, so next slide, we'll talk about scenario 2.
Just one comment, Charlie. Sorry, the Abington Route 139. That is, to the best of my knowledge, a state numbered route under municipal jurisdiction, not state highway in this section.
Okay,
612-525,
thank you, Pam.
no problem.
So scenario 2, as previously mentioned, has an identical set of projects for the years 2023 through 2026. The only difference being in years 2027. So starting off with 27, we have phase 2 of the Hanson project, advanced construction. And then with the available target funds, we had looked at our universe of projects and to see what projects would fit financially within the year and to see which ones had municipal support and were being advanced or at least talked about being advanced by municipalities and or MassDOT. So this project highlighted in green is the Brockton intersection improvements at Route 27, Quincy and Massasoit Boulevard project. This project had previously been in the tip years ago, became idled and did not move forward. So eventually MPO removed that project from the list. However, it remained an active project in terms of MassDOT PRC approval, hence the project ID number 606143. So this project was never deactivated, but there's been new interest in restarting this project. So similar to the previous effort, this is option number 2, and it doesn't quite spend down as much regional target funds in this year due to the singular project cost. Before we move on to the universe of projects, I ask if there's any questions on scenario 2.
Any questions? All right, I would keep going, Charlie.
Next slide, please. So one of the things that in addition to the expenditure and programming and expenditure of regional target funds, there's a section in the tip that's comprised of projects funded with statewide funds. So note here in green, there are 2 additional projects being added. The first is in Avon, intersection improvements at Route 28, Spring Street and Harrison Boulevard in the year 2026. And the second project being added to this menu of projects with state funds is in Brockton, systematic countermeasures, safe streets project in the city of Brockton in the amount of $4 million for the year 2024. The other 2 projects are currently programmed in the existing tip. I note that the first one, Brockton intersection improvements at Center Carrying Lyman, had been in 2023 and it's moving out to 2024. And the second project is already in the tip, staying in the same year as Plimpton Bridge replacement at Winnetoxet over Winnetoxet River. Before we move on to a quick review of the universe of projects, I ask the attendees if there are any questions so far.
Any questions? Seeing none, keep going, Charlie.
Okay, next slide. So as previously referenced, this is the menu or universe of projects that we drew upon in our active project set to see which ones could possibly fit in 2027. And we reviewed several of these projects with the Mass Readiness Day, TIP Readiness Days effort. And you see here, the first project in the list is the one proposed for 27. If you go down a couple, project number 3 is the one that's proposed to be programmed using statewide funds. So you can see, for an example of where projects in this list become candidate projects for 2027. I do note there are other projects in this list, such as Brockton intersection improvements at Belmont, Pearl, and Stonehill Street. But by its very nature of its cost, being $8 million and change, we just didn't have the financial capacity to consider this in 2027. And the same is true with Brockton Forest Avenue Corridor project. Just by virtue of its cost, we just didn't have room to put that project in 27 as a consideration. So I just wanted to spotlight that if people had questions, how we came up with the potential projects. So are there questions on this list before we go back to the MPO's further review and discussion of the scenarios? Pam?
Sorry, I moved the people over there. I found the unmute. Yeah, I apologize. I don't have this in front of me, but I think there's another project in Easton that was recently approved by PRC.
Right.
I will, okay, you're aware of that. Okay.
Yeah, so
thank you.
the one Pam's talking about is 612269 Easton improvements on Foundry Street, 106-123. So it's pre-25% design, but as you can see here, the cost escalated price for 2027 is in the neighborhood of $16 million and change.
Wow.
right.
I believe there's another one, and I will find the project file number. It was just recently approved, and it is the section of 138 where 123 is coincident with it, basically from Belmont Street to Depot Street with Stonehill College, and then heading south through the next 2 signals. I'll find the, you might not have it on your list because it was just recently approved. But I'll find that and send it to you, Charlie.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions anyone has? All right, Charlie.
So Sean, if you could go back to scenario 1. So this is the time for the MPO to continue its discussion and review of scenario 1 and 2 and potentially concur on a preferred set of projects or provide additional direction and guidance to the MPO staff to conduct further analysis and then represent at a future date.
Charlie, are you looking for a vote or just a sense of consensus?
A sense of consensus on the preferred set of projects so that we can start working on the draft tip itself and then be ready for the next MPO meeting.
Okay. Does anyone, oh, sorry, Charlie, go ahead.
I do see Mayor Sullivan coming into the meeting. Welcome, Mayor Sullivan.
Is he muted?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Charlie. Sorry I'm a little late. I apologize. Good morning, Mary.
Welcome, Mayor. Do you want to say any words before we start talking about the 2 scenarios, Mayor?
Yeah, if I could. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for being on this call. I want to thank Mary for her leadership and everybody at OCPC. I mean, Charlie is just an unbelievable asset, not just to Brockton, but for the region. I recently had a conversation with the new president at Massasoit, Ray DiPasquale, who was an elected official in Springfield before he went into higher ed, was a school committee member and a city councilor. And Ray and I have a shared vision for what's good for Massasoit is good for the city of Brockton and neighboring communities as well. So I know the tip for that area has been around for a long time, previous mayors. So, you know, we as a community want to continue to work forward to achieve that goal. So just want to, again, thank everybody. I know a lot of people have been very patient. OCPC has been a wonderful advocate for that. But as the mayor of Brockton, now that thankfully COVID looks like it's starting to minimize, thank God, I have to focus on what's going to be good for the future and what's going to be good for the city and the Massasoit Community College. So just want to let everybody know that, again, I'm hoping that it doesn't disappear. I'm hoping that we can prioritize that again. And I do want to thank everybody because I know people have been extremely patient relative to that TIP project for a long time. So thanks again, Charlie and Mary.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to mention your Boston Herald article? Just because it's today.
Oh, is it in today's paper? Oh my God, Mayor, I didn't know wow, that's something. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've done as mayor is I'm trying to forge a relationship with all of the municipalities. Some of us believe that the South Coast, including Fall River, New Bedford, and Brockton and Weymouth would truly benefit by increased MBTA commuter. And so I was able to draft an op-ed that the Boston Globe decided not to run, but the Herald thankfully ran with it. And I guess it's in today's paper. So again, you know, I think it's short-sighted to talk about only Boston and the North Shore. And so my view is, you know, really as a community here in the city of Champions, you know, what's good for Brockton really truly benefits Abington and Avon and goes all the way down to Situate and beyond. So again, I want to thank you, Mary, for acknowledging that, make me aware that they ran it today. I have to go out and buy one now. But again, I want to thank everybody. And you know, with that being said, you know, I've spoken to Mike Lambert, who is, you know, the executive director at the Bat Bus. And as mayor of Brockton, I chair Bat Bus's corporate board. So, you know, many of you, you know, your constituencies utilize that transport as well. So it's all hands on deck. You know, the streets and the roads of Brockton and all neighboring communities are better because of the efforts of Mary and her team. And I do want to thank our friends at the state, because without the efforts of the state, none of us would be doing what we need to do. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, with that, does someone want to suggest either scenario 1 or 2 is the preferred one to work on?
Doesn't seem to be major differences.
I think the big difference is, Dan, as Charlie has said, is scenario 1 has Abington, Stoughton, and
Right,
scenario
yeah.
2 has the Brockton Massasoit project coming back into the tip. So I think that's the choice frame, right, Charles? So unless someone wants to bring one of the universal projects, one of those into the mix.
No, I'd make a motion that we approve scenario 1.
So I don't think we need to make a motion. We're just
I'm
trying to
sorry,
get.
two. I like the one with the tip with the Massasoit and Mayor Sullivan.
All right.
I can agree with her because of the fact that that's been on and off for that intersection. They did a little bit of work on that intersection, but it needs to be completed, and we have pushed it down the line. I'm glad that it's back. It's a very busy intersection. I'll go with scenario 2. That's my vote, if needed.
Thank you, Mr. Salvucci. I also want to go on the record and say I support scenario 2 as well. And I mean, that whole area is going to be revitalized. A lot of us as youngsters went to Christo's, the old Christo's restaurant over there, which is long gone. But that is going to be rehabbed and redeveloped, and RFP will be going out with our friends from DCAM. So I would strongly support scenario 2 as well. So thank you.
Any other voting members want to weigh in?
The only
All
thing
right,
that I would, the only
Pam?
thing that I would say
Oh,
is
Mary,
that,
go ahead.
sorry, Pam, I apologize. I should
okay.
have had my hand raised. Charlie and I did review both of these along with Bill McNulty from our staff. A lot of thought, a lot of, I know the tip readiness day that both Bill McNulty and Charlie sat in on. It's not always easy, but I want to at least say from OCPC's perspective, right? We have 17 communities. We really, this is a good representation from across our region with the funding that's coming in. And just appreciation for Charlie's knowledge. It was a bit of a chess game because if you do this, it has effect on this and then it moves on. But this is I really give great credit to Charlie on pulling this together and walking us through.
Thanks, Mary. Pam?
I agree. It is very difficult, and I think Charlie and his team did a great job. This isn't as much a choice of scenario 1 or 2. I just wanted to note the $9 million unprogrammed balance in federal fiscal year 24. And I do believe Charlie had placed the projects where they were recommended at TIP Day. That being said, if the proponents of the projects, including Mass DOT, if we can continue to work with our designers and get all our ducks in a row, when we revisit this, I'd say next year, or even, if a project seems to be moving up relatively quickly, which is challenging because they do take a long time, there's a possibility, let's say, and I would rather say federal fiscal year 24, when we revisit it again, that if we could find, if any of these could be moved up, then there'll also be a possibility to get other projects in. So it's really imperative to just keep the projects on track. That way, if funding does arise, there's a possibility to utilize that.
So the only thing I would add to what Pam said, and if my past experience doing this for a while suggests anything, obviously Federal Highway, Andrew, would look at leaving $9 million on the table, even if it's dropped for now, is something we should work to try to program. So I think, Charlie, as you all work with the municipalities, and I know Derek's going to touch on 2022 later in his presentation, that we need to kind of shake the trees and try to find other projects because we are going to have gaps in a lot of different places. So just playing off of what Pam said. All right, so in general, does anyone oppose scenario 2 as the consensus option for Charlie and his team to move forward with as we work to build the tip next month? All right, I don't see any opposition, so Charlie, scenario 2 it is.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, with that, I think we can move on to the next agenda item. Do you want to touch on BAT at all, either Mike or Charlie? Since we didn't talk about that.
Mr. Chair, so we just included this draft list, and just note this is a starting point in the conversation as BAT is working with MassDOT and its state partners on developing the list for the Grants Plus, and I defer to Administrator Lambert.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Chair. Yep, just as mentioned briefly in my intro, the focus here is on state of good repair. We are following along with our bus replacement plan, but after this current fiscal year, it shifts, as I mentioned, to electric. So along with those electric bus procurements come needed infrastructure so that we can have chargers, solar powering, things like that. The other thing you'll see, the other sort of different aspect of this from other years is you'll see some numbers in the other federal transit column for our bus replacement and infrastructure. And that represents an intent to apply for federal low emission grants and try and bring in extra federal funding to the Commonwealth to help support the initiative.
All right, thanks, Mike. Any quick questions for Mike right now? All right, so obviously we'll talk more about BAT's list as we get into the tip next month as well. So thank you for that. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is development of the federal fiscal year 2023 Unified Planning Work Program. Charlie, is this you?
This will be Bill McNulty.
All right, go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now we're in the process of developing our unified planning work program for the next federal fiscal year. As everyone on this board knows, the UPWP is basically how we spend our planning dollars that we get every year through our contract. And this, so in the UPWP has different sections. So section 1000, for example, focuses on the 3C document. So like developing this UPWP or developing the tip. The 2000 level is things like management systems, system planning, demographics, and then level 3000 is really the kind of the larger scale projects that that we do, that you see us bringing to this board as updates and presentations. So those are the corridor studies and kind of the bigger projects, and that's what I'm talk excuse me, talk about today. Excuse me, what we're looking at and putting into this excuse me, putting into this UPWP. So Sean, if you want to go to the next slide. So on your, on your excuse me, on your screen, you can see the projects that we're looking at from our universal projects. I will note that this is the year that we update our quadrennial long-range transportation plan. That's a plan that's updated every 4 years. And this coming federal fiscal year will be the year that it's really the meat and potatoes of putting together that plan. So you can see that's a little like kind of halfway down the list there, the update of that plan. That will be the major focus of this coming UPWP. I'm sorry about my voice. I have allergies. But the
Don't worry about it, Bill. Just keep going.
thank you.
Feeling the same thing.
Yeah, it's that time of year. So in addition to the UPWP, I mean, in addition to the LRTP update, you can see that the other things that we're considering putting in this plan, and on the right half side of the table, you can see the evaluation criteria that we rank these projects on. So things like environmental, equity, safety, and mobility, doesn't meet a demonstrated need that's already been identified in the RTP, the LRTP, I should say. Does it address mobility? So you can see those are evaluation criteria categories, and obviously there's an X there. It does meet that criteria. You can see most all these projects meet most, if not all of those criteria. Couple of projects don't meet all of them, but still nonetheless important projects. So just going down the list, so things that we're considering: Brockton, a Route 27 corridor study that would focus on Reynolds Memorial Highway. Obviously a very busy area. Duxbury, looking at a Route 14 corridor through that town. If we did that, I suspect we'd also include St. George Street. A few years ago, we did a safety and livability study for St. George Street. If you're not familiar with Duxbury, so Route 14 technically ends and then continues on as St. George Street, basically to the Washington Street, the Powder Point Bridge area. So I think if we did that, we would include St. George Street. Plymouth, Long Pond Road, like the northern half of that corridor from Aubrey Street down to Drew Road. Looking at an updated coordination plan of public transit and human services transportation. The potentially continuing the road safety audits at multiple locations throughout the region. So that's been a very successful program these past 2 years, where we've identified high crash locations in the region in an effort to reduce fatalities and injuries in the region and meet, at least make strides to meeting our safety performance targets. So, the potential that we continue that. Potentially, we could do an update to our major bottleneck identification of major bottlenecks in the region. That was a study that was well received several years ago. It's several years old now, so we could revisit that. We could look at safety and mobility on the two major limited access highways that serve our region, Route 3 and Route 24. Route 24, has historically, some safety issues, a lot of fatal crashes. We had one the other night in Brockton. Whereas Route 3 has its own challenges. Route 3 has seen explosive growth along that corridor, especially in the southern half of the southern half of Route 3 down in the Plymouth area. Just a lot of growth. So that's brought its own challenges. So that there's a potential that we could do studies looking at those two corridors. So that's these are the ideas that we're looking at bringing into this UPWP. Right now, this is just kind of an informational update. And we definitely, we're kicking these ideas around in-house, coordinating with each other. And we're also going to be going to the Joint Transportation Committee and soliciting their input. So right now, this is basically like an informational update, but if anyone on this board has input, you feel very strongly about any of these being included in the next UPWP, certainly, bring it up now, or you can always contact me, offline. You send me an email, call me. And so, I guess I'd open up to if anyone has any comments or questions about this right now.
All right, any questions, Pam?
Bill, nice presentation. I have a question on the first proposal, the Brockton Route 27.
Mhm.
Which section are you looking at?
So it would be, it hasn't been completely identified, but more or less basically from Route 20, from Pleasant Street, that intersection that was recently redone, and probably looking all the way to like Oak Street. So Reynolds Highway, and then that portion by Good Sam, and then Oak Street to the Stoughton Town Line. I think that's probably the more or less a geographic scope that we'd be looking at there. It's a very congested area. There's some high crash locations along that corridor. So
Yeah, no, I agree. I actually pulled up our GeoDot map while you were giving your presentation, and I thought, because I looked at this not too long ago, and for some reason I thought there were more high crash locations, which there may be. I mean, I gave it a 20-second look right now, but I thought at Oak Street, and then where it bends around heading toward Westgate on this side of the, on the same side of the interchange. But there is definitely a number of crash clusters like over the years at unfortunately one of the new signals in Christie's Drive. So, okay, I just wanted to try to understand the limits that you were looking at. Thank you.
Yeah, it would be that section more or less.
Okay, great.
Charlie?
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just note that just as a follow-up to Pam's inquiry, item number 6 on this list is it has a note that locations to be determined as a result of the high priority corridor screening assessment, and note that the high priority corridor screening assessment is a project that's happening now under the direction of Ray Garino and Guochang Li, and they're doing a deep dive on data, whether it's pavement, crash, presence of pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and the end product of that will help inform this list and identify areas for new corridor studies. So that's something happening in real time. So to Pam's point, and Bill's point, that that Route 27 Reynolds, the actual scope and geographic areas could be extended on that. That's point number 1. And point number 2 is, as Bill mentioned, the long-range transportation plan that happens on a 4-year cycle. That's something that's definitely going to be coming in as a programmatic requirement. Another programmatic requirement is item number 4, the public transit, human services, transportation plan. That's done on a 4-year cycle as well. And that needs to be developed and ultimately endorsed by the MPO and enacted in order to have service providers eligible for the community transportation grant through MassDOT, because they draw on that plan as a requirement. So we have aligned that to happen in the same year that the long range transportation plan happens. So those would be two key MPO action items over the upcoming UPWP.
All right, thanks for that, Charlie. Anyone else want to talk about the UPWP before we move along? All right, I don't see any, so thank you, Bill. We'll continue to talk about this
Welcome.
as we
Thank
get
you.
further into the certification year. So with that, why don't we move to the next agenda item, which I believe is Derek Cravat doing a presentation on the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill. Take it away, Derek.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a presentation prepared for this. So can folks see that okay?
Yeah, we can see
Yes.
Derek.
Okay, perfect. So thank you. My name is Derek Cravat. I'm the manager of MPO activities at MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. I'll be presenting today on the bipartisan infrastructure law, or bill, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This was passed this past fall of 2021 and serves as the new surface transportation reauthorization bill on the federal level, as well as providing a lot of additional funding for transportation across the country. So the agenda for today covers highway formula programs, transit formula programs, and then a little bit on discretionary programs or kind of grant style programs that are included in the new bill. The first one is highway formula funding, and I'll just say for all of this, a lot of this material is certainly a little dense. So if there are any questions, feel free to put anything in the chat, or feel free to ask that as we go. And Andrew, I know you're on the call as well. So if there's anything from the federal perspective you want to clarify, please do feel free to jump in or use the chat. But I'll just kind of give an overview of what's included and the implications for the MPO, because it does mean increase in funding. And as Steve mentioned earlier, some information about 2022 that we want to make sure is clear to folks and share that. So starting off though, just with some background on the highway formula funding. Like I said, this serves as the surface transportation reauthorization for the years fiscal years 2022 and 2026. And it includes about $5.4 billion in highway formula funds. So these are comprised of $3.5 billion for amounts that are already included in the current STIP. So these are programs like National Highway Performance Program, STBG, CMAQ, the ones that we are already familiar with. But it also includes increases in these programs of $449 million. So the programs in the current STIP are increasing, and then it includes an additional $1.4 billion for other formula programs. And these are listed on the bottom of the slide. So these include $1.1 billion for a new bridge program, additional money for a new resiliency program that's called Protect, $93.7 million for carbon reduction program, which is also a new formula program that gets distributed in the same fashion as the core formula programs like HSIP and STBG and all those other ones, as well as Protect. And then $63.5 million for a new electric vehicle infrastructure program, and $9.1 million for ferry boats and terminals. So these are all new funding included on top of what's already included in the STIP. So just some background on some of the terms that I'll be using that describe some of the federal budgeting process. The bill does include a number of different types of transportation funding. One is contract authority. So these are funds directly from the Highway Trust Fund established by a Reauthorization Act and not subject to annual appropriation. However, we do have an obligation limitation that constrains whether this full amount can be spent. So we were operating under a continuing resolution for the past couple of months, but that has since been resolved, and there will be an appropriations bill. I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. Supplemental appropriations are appropriations that are kind of made outside of the appropriations process, and they're not subject to this obligation limitation. So there are a few programs funded with supplemental appropriations in the bill. And then the final category we're highlighting is authorizations subject to appropriation that don't actually require an appropriations bill to spend, but this is a smaller portion of what's included in the bill. So I think the takeaway from this slide is most of the funding, 83%, is funded through contract authority and is subject to the obligation limitation. So we actually need an appropriations bill to spend a lot of that funding, as well as a full obligation limitation for a lot of the funding included in the bill. As I said, as of this week, we do have a new omnibus appropriations bill that was, I believe, passed by Congress and is expected to be passed if it hasn't already, sort of signed by the president to make funding available, appropriations to be available for multiple agencies, including Department of Transportation. So there is a short-term continuing resolution that expires tomorrow, March 15th. And after that time, the new 2022 funding that's included in the bill, again, because it's funding 22 through 26, the infrastructure law, that funding will then become available. So it will, and it will provide for the sufficient obligation authority to actually spend that. So the new programs that are included in the bill, including the PROTECT funding and the carbon reduction funding, which are two new programs, will be available. And we will be able to access that 2022 funding. The other programs funded with supplemental appropriations, like the new bridge program and electric vehicle infrastructure program, those were already available to spend, but we do need a plan in place for the electric vehicle funding. The bridge program, there have been projects already identified for that, and that's in process. But this new news on the sort of availability of appropriations and obligation limitation means that for regional target, which of course is most relevant, I think, to this body and other MPOs across the state, means that we will have access to that 2022 funding at the regional level. So just some background on the regional target. Of course, we annually apportion that based on the funding in the Highway Trust Fund. So the core formula funding we get, we break it up amongst the regions by a previously agreed upon sort of formula that allocates 1/3 of funding to the MPOs based on the MARPA formula, and then the other 2/3 to MassDOT Highway Division programs. And because the bill serves as that reauthorization for 2022 to 2026, and we now have an appropriations bill for 2022, that means that the additional funding included in the bill does kick in. So that if we use that same formula that we use across all the years for 2022, that would mean an increase in the regional target by about $2 million. So we're currently coordinating between folks at MassDOT and our other planning partners to identify sort of uses of this funding and running some analyses to see which projects might be ready to spend this funding on, and looking at options for other things like advanced construction. So this is something we'll coordinate with Old Colony staff on consistently over the next few weeks and come up with a plan so we can take any action that might be necessary at the MPO to potentially account for this new funding that is available. And then looking ahead to 23 through 26, the remainder of the bill period, there will be, again, increases across the board in regional target funding. So we're assuming an obligation authority of 90% based on past obligation authority that we've had. And the STIP for regional target is increasing for all MPOs by $442 million across 5 years, which, the overall funding is increasing by 442. Regional target, again, taking about 1/3 of that is 150.7 million, which means for Old Colony, increase overall between 23 and 26 of about $8.9 million. So that's over a 4-year period. So it's around $2 million of increase per year that the region will have added to the regional target for all years of the bill. So that's just and that's accounted for in the targets that Charlie presented earlier for 23 to 26. We haven't discussed 22 yet because we just got this news about appropriations bill, but the target amounts that you saw earlier did include the new targets for 23 to 26 that are higher because of this bill. And then the remaining 2/3 of the new highway formula funding gets distributed to MassDOT based on that formula. So approximately 2/3 of these funds go towards statewide projects. So these are our sort of bridge program, our bicycle and pedestrian program, MPO planning funds, and other things that are included in the statewide section of our state transportation improvement program. So those are also getting developed right now for the bill lists for that. Charlie presented the statewide lists for the region. That's what this 2/3 of funding is going toward, are projects that MassDOT program managers work on selecting in coordination with others and shared with all of the MPO partners as well. And again, just to note that the supplemental appropriations do fund the Formula Bridge program, electric vehicle program, and ferry boat program. So there are funding tables actually available on the STIP website now that look at some of the Formula Bridge program projects, and those will also be included in the upcoming STIP. So those are available. And then just another note on supplemental appropriations that we just wanted to make sure folks know. So this is mostly relevant for, I think, the MassDOT programs, the Formula Bridge program and electric vehicle charging program, but they're not actually subject to this use it or lose it requirement the same way some of the other formula programs are. So if we don't spend a portion of some of the programs funded with supplemental appropriations, we can spend that in future years. So that's just has to be spent, I think, over a 4-year period. And again, the apportionment for electric vehicles is about 63.5 million, and it's available until expended. But just another note on that is we do need to have a state approved electric vehicle infrastructure plan to be in place and approved by Federal Highway before funding is obligated. And that's something we're currently scoping out and working to develop. We'll have more details on in the future. So this is just summarizing the highway formula funding piece. So just again, increasing funding over the 5-year period by about 34%. So $449 million for existing programs, $200 million for those new funded formula programs, carbon reduction and protect, and $1.2 billion for a new bridge program and electric vehicle program. The 22 increases will be taking effect as of this week because of the appropriations bill. So we'll be working with the region to accommodate that and talking about options. And then again, the supplemental programs are also available for spending, and continue to work on developing plans for those. So that was a lot.
Derek,
Yes.
Derek,
Yeah.
why don't we take a break there and let's see if anyone has any questions. And I think there's a lot in here. So Derek, I think we should be sharing this presentation with each of the MPOs because there's a lot in here. But does anyone have any questions what Derek has gone through so far? All right, I guess we can keep going, Derek.
Okay, sounds good. So that was a lot on the highway side. This next portion is focused on, this slide is focused on transit formula funding. So just to note that the amount of transit formula funding included in the bill is approximately 2.8 billion, of which 2.2 billion is for the MBTA, and then the remaining, I guess 600 million gets distributed to the regional transit authorities based on their respective kind of split letters that they have with MassDOT Rail and Transit Division. So the formula funds, which are for both the MBTA but also other regional transit authorities, is broken up by urbanized area funds, state of good repair funds, and bus facility funds. The amounts on this slide are for the MBTA, but I think BAT certainly is probably most aware of the funding that they'll be receiving. So I know that Mike Lambert's probably very familiar with this, but did just want to say that these are the programs that are included in the bill, and there are no new transit formula programs. There are some new discretionary programs for transit, but the existing formula programs like the 5307 operating assistance and 5339, and the ones that I think this body votes to endorse as part of the TIP each year are just included. Again, they're just renewed at higher levels from the new bill. So that's transit formula. Now moving on to the discretionary programs that are included in the bill. So there's over 35 discretionary programs. So these are kind of competitive programs that are administered by the US DOT and operating agencies. So 18 existing programs are reauthorized, and then there are actually 19 new programs authorized for an aggregate amount of about $36.1 billion, administered by various entities within US DOT. So the Office of the Secretary, Federal Highway, Federal Transit, Federal Railroad, the Maritime Commission. You can see the amounts and the number of programs there. And again, we'll make these slides available so you can go over in more detail. And just a note on the bottom that there are some transit projects that could be eligible for funding under Federal Highway or Federal Railroad programs, depending on statutory language. So I know, for CMAQ, for example, similar to how we might be able to flex that to transit, there are opportunities through grant programs that we can flex to transit as well, or have transit be an eligible use for some of the federal highway programs. This slide just notes the 3 largest programs administered by the Office of the Secretary: RAISE grants, mega project grants, and Safe Streets and Roads for All. So RAISE is an existing program, so folks might be familiar with this one. It's authorized at $7.5 billion over 5 years. So this is nationally a competitive grant program that state DOTs and local governments and others can apply to for funding for specific projects. There's actually a notice of funding opportunity out right now for federal fiscal year 2022. It was issued February 4th, and the deadline is April 14th. There is more funding available because of the new bill for this program. So definitely encourage folks to familiarize yourself with that if there might be some interest in that, and MassDOT is of course reviewing as well. And we'll coordinate with regions as necessary. There's another new program included. The next 2 listed here are new programs included in the bill. One for National Infrastructure Project Assistance Grants. So this is a new program. There's selection criteria that was released for this on February 14th. So these are much more larger projects that could be funded. And then there's a new program focused on safety called Safe Streets and Roads for All. And a notice of funding opportunity is expected to be released in the 2nd quarter, so probably over the next few months. There should be something out on this, at least that's what the guidance has said so far. And this is available to MPOs, local governments, and federally recognized tribes, but not available to states. State DOTs are not considered eligible entities under this program. It's meant to be more of a local and regional focus on providing grant funding for safety projects. So just again, there's a few more discretionary programs from Federal Highway that we wanted to highlight. 6 large programs administered by Federal Highway Administration: the Infra Grants Bridge Investment Program, Protect Grants, Electric Vehicle Charging Grants, Rural Surface Transportation Grants, and Reconnecting Communities Pilots Program. Infra is the first one. This is focused on significant freight and highway projects. There was some discussion about a no-fill potentially being released over the past few months, but we haven't seen anything on this one yet, but it may be upcoming throughout the year. So just, continue to be on the lookout for that one. The Bridge Investment Program is a new bridge program that's discretionary that's included in the bill. So in addition to the Bridge Formula Program and the existing funding that we can use on bridges, there is a whole new competitive bridge program called the Bridge Investment Program. And it includes the amounts here for this. And this is again with supplemental appropriations that can be accessed at any time. And then in addition to this Protect program, so the acronym for that is a very creative acronym: Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, Cost-Saving Transportation Grants. This is really focused on resiliency. And so in addition to the formula funding that was included for Protect, so MassDOT will get an apportionment that will make available based on our formulas to others, including MPOs. This is also designed as discretionary. So a portion of the program is formula, a portion of Protect is competitive and discretionary. So there's funding available, and new program guidance will likely be released over the coming months on opportunities to apply for Protect grants, again, designed to focus on resiliency of the system. And then charging and fueling infrastructure grants. Similarly, we get this as part of a formula program, but there's also a competitive side of this one as well. So there are funds reserved to be spent on this as part of as a competitive process. And they're divided between a corridor program and a community program. So certain projects, there's a certain proportion of the funding can only be spent on projects that are on a alternative fuel corridor. So that's a designation that MassDOT is involved in kind of making for certain corridors. And then certain projects do not have to meet that requirement. So there's funding kind of available for multiple different project types. And then program for rural surface transportation grants, which is, of course, focused on rural projects. And then this Reconnecting Community Pilots program. So this is, no new major guidance on these ones yet, but maybe upcoming Reconnecting Communities is kind of all about looking at kind of where there's been historical divides because of interstates, where there might be opportunities to reconnect portions that might have been cut off from those. So sort of an interesting program focused on kind of equity and transportation. These last two slides just talk about the discretionary programs for transit. So there are 5 large programs administered by FTA for discretionary programs. Listed here: capital investment grants, lower no emission bus grants, bus and bus facilities grants, and then a new program called All Stations Accessibility Program and rail vehicle replacement grants. So capital investment grants available as part of this. These are projects that fund, transit capital on a discretionary basis. Lower no emission bus grants, looking at kind of reducing emissions from transit vehicles. There is a NOFO, notice of funding opportunity, out for this right now. It was issued on March 4th, 2022. That I'm sure BAT is aware of, but just wanted to include here. And similarly, that was a joint NOFO that also included bus and bus facilities competitive grants, which is also available under the new bill. There's a new program under the bill called All Stations Accessibility Program that looks to upgrade accessibility of fixed guideway public transportation system to make it more accessible to people with disabilities. So that's a new program. And then another new one highlighted is the rail vehicle replacement grants. So that's another new program, and we expect to see a NOFO on that within the second quarter of this year, so over the next few months. So that's the last slide, so happy to take any questions.
All right, anyone have any questions? Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Derek, for presenting this information. I just wanted to note on the omnibus appropriations, we're still awaiting clear guidance, I think, from headquarters on exactly, when that funding becomes available. In theory, it should be available pretty quickly, but any program under the new guidance, I guess we, just caution, don't rush to, we can't program things immediately, but we will receive guidance soon about when they are available for programming. And for, always to stay up to date, I think I've sent it around to the MPOs, but there is a federal highway and a federal transit website where funding memos, appropriations, details, presentations, NOFOs get posted. So I'll share those in the chat, but keep an eye.
Thanks, Andrew. Mike?
Yep, thanks, Derek. That was a great presentation. Just one point of clarification. The transit formula funds come to the Boston urbanized area and are then negotiated over between the T and us and several other RTAs, as well as New Hampshire. So that those numbers are still yet to be determined, yet to be negotiated. And certainly that will do all it can to make sure that as much funding for the Old Colony planning area can be procured as possible.
All right, anyone else? All right, thank you, Derek. Let's move on to the next agenda item. And as As Derek and I said, we'll share this with you all, and then if there's any questions, please read out to Derek by email or get Charlie some questions, and Charlie and Derek can talk about it. All right, on to agenda item 8, which is administrative matters, other business, date and time of next meeting. Charlie, what do we got?
So thank you. So item number 1 is just a note to communities and project proponents to work through MAPID and in advance of the May 2022 Project Review Committee meeting. And there will be a pre-PRC meeting happening 2 weeks before. So, communities are encouraged to get their information in and not wait till the last minute. And as noted, the PRC meets 3 times per year. And just to give the floor to Pam, if Pam has any additional thoughts on this.
Thank you, Charlie. As far as the timeline that you just mentioned, the district processes and evaluates and scores all of the projects before the pre-PRC meeting. So the sooner that proposals get to us, the better off we are to make sure that we can successfully get the project to PRC for that particular meeting. And as you mentioned, Charlie, it does, PRC does meet 3 times a year. So, there is a process, the project need, the project, the PN, and then the PS, the project scope that needs to be all, and then an evaluation before a project goes to pre-PRC and PRC. So if people are interested in making the May meeting, I would suggest that you move quickly now. We are available to help in any way that we can. I also would suggest outreach. Community outreach is a very important part, just to make sure that people are aware, informed, and support projects. So as I mentioned, we're available, myself, and I know Charlie's and his team are very helpful as well. Thank
Schuster?
you.
Thanks, Pam. Schuster?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that for the pre-PRC front and for the projects that the region considers, that you look to your long-range transportation plan for your visions and goals for a little inspiration for some of those projects, and just to make sure that they're consistent with the goals you set out for a couple years ago. That's all.
Thanks, Schuster. Pam, you have something else?
I actually just wanted to mention the corridor studies and the long-range plan that Derek mentioned. We do work closely with the regions and the communities to try to develop projects through the long-range plan and the corridor studies and other studies that each region, including Old Colony, work on through their UPWP. And I know it's been very successful. And Old Colony will do a lot of the legwork and outreach and study beforehand. And then it's nice to see something physical come to fruition from all their hard work. So nice way to go.
All right. Other administrative matters, Charlie?
Yeah, next slide, please. So as Derek had reported on earlier, the RAISE grants, there's an open application timeline right now, and applications are due April 14th. And there's a lot of information on the website online that you can visit. City of Brockton had applied last year for a RAISE grant to re-implement the two-way traffic system. Though it received a recommended review status, it didn't make the final cut on the funded project. So it's our understanding that the city's re-engaging and potentially will be applying again for a RAISE grant for the downtown system. Next slide.
All right.
So if you're not busy on March 30th at 5 p.m., why not join the Walk Boston annual meeting? And this is where they present their annual Golden Shoe Award and have some awards in the Awards for this year, Josh Ostra from T for Mass, Meg Robinson, and Just Walk Boston. And the keynote speakers, Kyle Robideau, advocate for the disability community. And I believe the event is free, so there's information there where you can register. Next slide. And hey, who cannot forget the MassDOT Transportation Innovation Conference, save the date, 24 through 25 of May, and registration is open now. So I understand that there may have been an extension for the submission of conference abstracts. I know OCPC put in an abstract.
So they were, yeah, they were due 2 Fridays ago, and we extended to this past Friday, Charlie, but
Okay,
if people still get stuff in, obviously helping put together the program with Highway, I could probably find a spot for people, so.
thank you. Next slide. This is a save the date for your next MPO meeting. So looking out 3 months, April 19th, May 17th, and June 21st at 10 a.m. We will plan to have these in the remote virtual format.
So I just want to add what Charlie's saying. It's really critical. As you all know, this is the key time of year for us for certification documents, and this year's tip with all the elements of the bill that Derek just went over is going to make, probably for a very busy 3 months. So please try to make sure you can make the meeting so we have quorums to take the actions we need to take. So I say that every year, but this year in particular is going to be interesting with the additional stuff we have to consider. So please keep that in mind. All right. Is there anything else, Charlie, other than to adjourn?
I believe that's all we have. Thank you.
All right. Can I get a motion and a second to adjourn, please?
I'll motion Dan Salvucci Whitman.
Mary Waldron, second.
All right. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Abstaining. All opposed. All right. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. We'll see you in April, probably with a very busy agenda. So please start enjoying the nice weather. We'll see you in about a month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.